Since 1994, the Helen Keller Foundation for Research and Education has been awarding the Helen Keller Prize for Vision Research. This coveted honor is awarded for research excellence as demonstrated by a number of significant contributions to vision science during the course of a career or for a single contribution of exceptional importance to vision science. This honor has been bestowed on 25 exceptional individuals, and for 2015, we are proud to welcome Gordon E. Legg and Robert W. Massoff to our laureate family.
So thanks for coming. Someone asked President Grover Cleveland how long it took him to prepare a speech, and he said, if you want me to talk for an hour, I can do that right now. If you want me to talk for 10 minutes, it'll take me a few days to prepare. I'm Bob Morris, President of the Helen Keller Foundation for Research and Education, and I want to thank Laura Beckwith for putting on this show, and Keller Johnson Thompson for representing the Helen Keller family, and acknowledge Ferenc Kuhn, our Director of Clinical Research. So, welcome once more to our annual celebration of progress in vision research. Honoring great contributors is important in itself, but inevitably it also inspires colleagues to new heights as well. Helen Keller was chosen by Time magazine as one of the 100 most important people to live in the 20th century. Think about how many billions of people lived in the 20th century. And throughout the world, her legacy continues to garner public admiration. We're grateful to the selection committee for consistently choosing laureates who justify the singular honor of forever being associated with her name. Helen Keller fostered partnerships to achieve so much during her lifetime. And with that inspiration, the Helen Keller Foundation is now pleased to welcome Bright Focus Foundation as a partner in presenting this prize in her name. So with that thought in mind, please join me in welcoming Stacy Holler, President and CEO of Bright Focus.
Good evening. I am delighted to be here on behalf of the Bright Focus Foundation. We are so very proud to join with the Helen Keller Foundation to present this very distinguished prize. Our two organizations are united by a shared commitment to saving sight, a shared belief that research, education, and greater awareness will improve people's lives. You may ask, why did Bright Focus and the Helen Keller Foundation come together? We believe the prize has the potential to be the Nobel Prize for Vision Research, and is our desire to be a partner and help in that growth and progress. For those of you who are not familiar with Bright Focus, we fund research worldwide to end diseases, two of which you're very familiar with: macular degeneration, glaucoma, and also Alzheimer's. In 2015, we will be supporting more than $5 million in new research grants, as part of a portfolio of $11 million in new grants. We support both basic research and clinical trials, and perhaps we're best known for supporting scientists early in their careers, helping jumpstart many exciting new ideas. And that is partly due today and in the past to a terrific group of scientists and researchers who are part of our scientific review committees and make sure that the investments and the support go to those most deserving and who have the greatest chance of providing not incremental but transformative results through their research. I want to thank the Helen Keller Foundation and her family for outstanding work in continuing Helen Keller's victories over blindness. It is a true honor to be part of this evening. And now I want to introduce Sheila West of the Wilmer Eye Institute at Johns Hopkins. She is co-chair of the Helen Keller Prize for Vision Research. Dr. West.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I would like to also extend my heartfelt thanks on behalf of my co-chair, Chris Patterson, to the members of the selection committee who have the task of deciding among such superb candidates for this award and who always seem to find exactly the right fit for the laureates. And I'd like to acknowledge Bronwyn Bateman, Carlos Belmonte, Alan Bird, Nick Delamere, Joe Hollyfield. Of course, we've applauded you already, so we're not going to applaud you again. Or yes, we will, in fact. Al Summer and Professor Hugh Taylor, if you're in the audience, please stand up so we can thank you for all your service for this organization. To introduce my colleague and dear friend, Gary Rubin, who is the Helen Keller Professor of Visual Rehabilitation at the Institute of Ophthalmology in London. Gary was a long-time and is a long-time colleague and has personal and professional connections with our laureates, and so it's a distinct honor to have him do the introduction tonight. Gary?
I'm honored to have been invited to introduce this year's recipients of the Helen Keller Prize for Vision Research, Gordon Legg and Robert Massoff. I've had the opportunity of working with both Gordon and Bob, and I can truly say that I can think of no one more deserving than they. Gordon Legg is a distinguished McKnight University professor at the University of Minnesota. He received a PhD in experimental psychology from Harvard in 1976 and spent the following year working as a postdoc with Fergus Campbell at Cambridge University. The year following that, he returned to the U.S. and he came for an interview for a job at the University of Minnesota where I was working on my PhD. I remember sitting on a student interview panel. We tried to impress Gordon with stories about winter temperatures of -40 in Minneapolis. But Gordon had done his homework as he always did and was quick to remind us that the temperature had never dropped below -32. And besides, he was from Toronto, Canada, and well familiar with cold weather. So Gordon took the job and has been at the U of M ever since. Gordon has received many honors throughout his career, far too many for me to list them. But among the most noteworthy are the Pizart Vision Award, the Glenn Fry and Charles Prentice Medals. Gordon was made a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a Gold Fellow at ARVO. Bob Massoff is Professor of Ophthalmology and Neuroscience and founding director of Multiple District 22 Lions Vision Research and Rehabilitation Center. That must take up a lot of room on his business card. At the Wilmer Eye Institute in Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Like Gordon, Bob did not start his academic career studying low vision. Bob attended Hamlin University in St. Paul, where he got a BA in psychology, then went off to Indiana for a PhD in physiological optics, and then returned to Johns Hopkins to do a postdoc under Louise Sloan, a name that would be familiar to most of you. 1 year later, Bob was given an academic appointment and made director of Sloan's Laboratory of Physiological Optics following her retirement. In the years that followed, Bob earned an international reputation for a series of papers on the progression of visual field loss in retinitis pigmentosa patients. There isn't time to explain how Bob's work with Roche analysis has revolutionized the administration and scoring of questionnaires, but it has made a tremendous difference. And along the way, Bob too has earned many awards. Again, too many to name them all, but including the Pizart Award from the Lighthouse, the Bressler Award, and fellowship honors from the American Academy of Optometry, Optical Society of America, and ARVO. So Gordon Legg and Bob Massoff took very different routes into low vision, but they share a passion for science and a commitment to applying that science to real-world problems. And oh yes, they spent their formative years in Minnesota, where the women are strong, the men are good-looking, and all scientists are above average. So congratulations to Gordon and Bob. It's been a pleasure working with you for all these years. And I'd now like to introduce Mrs. Keller Johnson Thompson, great-grandniece of Helen Keller, for the next part of our program.
Thank you. On behalf of the Helen Keller Foundation for Research and Education, its board of directors, and the family of Helen Keller, it's such an honor and privilege to be here with you this evening as we celebrate the 2015 Helen Keller Prize for Vision Research laureates. I'd like to share with you a story that my dad, Warren Johnson, who left this earth 18 months ago, used to share with me as a child. My dad was a very big part of the Helen Keller Foundation. When he passed away, he was chairman of the board, and Dad believed in the work of the foundation, even benefiting himself from the clinical research that Dr. Morris was doing. So please bear with me as I recount that story. As Dr. Frank Mayfield was touring the Tewksbury Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, he accidentally collided with an elderly floor maid. To cover the awkward moment, he asked her, "How long have you worked here?" And she replied, "Well, almost since the place opened." And he said, "Well, what can you tell me about this place?" And she said, "I don't know what I could tell you about it, but I want to show you something." And with that, she grabbed his hand and she led him under the oldest part of the building. It was there that he saw tiny cages that were rusting. And he asked, "What are those for?" And she replied, "That's where they kept Annie." "Who's Annie?" he said. Annie was a girl that was unruly, almost like a wild animal. They had to cage her at times to keep her out of trouble. Every time the doctors and nurses would come to check Annie out, they couldn't. She would scream and kick and spit. So one day when I got home, I thought, I need to do something nice for Annie. So I baked her a cake, and I took it to work the next day. I went down into that dark basement room, and as Annie lay there sleeping, I put the cake beside her cage. And I got out of there because it was tough sledding with Annie. I went back that afternoon to see if she had found it, and she'd eaten the whole thing. It was all gone. That introduced Annie and I in a way that no one ever thought possible. We actually became friends. And that's how it happened that every time the doctors and nurses needed to examine her, they would come to me and they would say, "Would you help us with Annie?" And of course, I would go and hold her hand and I would explain to her what was happening. And that's how the doctors found out that she was going blind from a disease called trachoma. A few months later, I went down to check on Annie and she wasn't there. I asked the director what had happened to her. And he said that they allowed her to go to school, to the Perkins School for the Blind over in Watertown. I thought about Annie all those years, and years later, I found out what did happen to her. She became a teacher. She accepted a job from a man in Tuscumbia, Alabama, whose daughter was deaf and blind. Dr. Mayfield stood in silence as he listened to the story. But that is how Ann Sullivan became the teacher of Helen Keller. And as Helen Keller was being considered for the Nobel Peace Prize, a reporter went up to her and he asked her, "Miss Keller, who was the greatest influence on your life?" And she said, "Of course, Ann Sullivan." But Ann Sullivan interrupted her, and as she spelled the manual alphabet in her hands, she said, "No, Helen, the greatest influence on both our lives was a maid at the Tewksbury Institute." You see, history is changed when one person says, "I will." Tonight, we celebrate the work of two distinguished men who have made it like their life's work to find better ways to assist those who have suffered from loss of sight and who have answered Aunt Helen's call when she said, "It's not enough to give the blind a life. We must give them a life worth living." Please join me as we welcome our 2015 Helen Keller laureates, Dr. Gordon Legg and Dr. Robert Massoff. At this time, I will bestow upon Dr. Legg the Helen Keller Medal. So for Dr. Massoff. Thank you so much and congratulations. Before I give Dr. Legg the podium, we also have honorariums for our laureates. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Keller, Johnson Thompson. Thank you, many others. Gary, for your kind introduction. Of course, thank you to the Helen Keller Foundation, Dr. Morris, the Bright Focus Foundation, Stacy Holler, and the selection committee, of course, Sheila and other members who are here. And I want to also thank Laura Beckwith for arranging the event tonight, which is really quite spectacular. And it's such a joy to have so many friends and colleagues here to share this honor with. And it's particularly wonderful for me to share this prestigious award with Bob Massoff. Bob and I have been colleagues, friends for many years. You heard a little bit about his great contributions to science, and as Gary pointed out, we also have those academic roots back in Minnesota, so I'm very happy about that too. And Helen, of course, Helen Keller has been an inspiration to us all, and particularly to those of us with disabilities. And I'm very grateful to the Helen Keller Foundation and the Bright Focus Foundation for raising the profile of low vision research with this year's award to Bob and me. And this focus on low vision seems very much in keeping with the aspirations of both Anne and Helen. So thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Keller, Johnson Thompson, I want to thank you for that inspirational presentation and for your introductions. And Gary has knocked it out of the park as usual, and it's a very hard act to follow, but been a major part of our lives, both for Gordon and for me, on not just at the time we spent together physically, but also professionally from that over the last 30 years. Thank the entire board and the selection committee of the Helen Keller Foundation and Bright Focus Foundation. I've got to meet all the wonderful people today, both organizations, and thank them for this honor. And I want to mention two of the most, probably the most important aspects of my career, the two most important influential groups of people and person and interconnection and the relationship to Helen Keller. My mentor and kind of my protector and the person who really got me started in my career at Wilmer was Dr. Arnold Patz. And as was mentioned in the introduction by Gary, I went to Wilmer to work with Louise Sloan, who became ill shortly after I arrived, and Dr. Patz took me under his wing. Arnold Patz won the Lasker Award, and Helen Keller was the person who did the introductions and gave the award. And then I have two last things I have to mention. A special guest and a special friend and someone I've worked with for many, many years is Jim Gashel. And Jim was on the board of directors of the National Federation of the Blind, and we've done a lot of projects together through the NFB, which is in Baltimore. And he's moved to Colorado, so he's much happier here now that he can be in winter all the time. And then my wife Pat, who's not only my partner, but has been a very strong collaborator. For the last 12 years, we've been working together on developing education programs for low vision. Pat has a company that does online courses and has focused an enormous amount of her attention on the problem of low vision, and has probably trained more specialists in low vision than anyone else can claim to do. And this has been very productive collaboration. So not only does she take care of me and dress me, but also has been a very strong collaborator. So I thank you very much for this honor. I'm deeply honored, and have a good time tonight. Thank you very much for coming.